In every neighborhood, there are always small inconveniences, the kinds of things most people brush off without giving too much thought. A misplaced trash bin, a late-night barking dog, or a neighbor who mows their lawn just a little too early. On the weekends, these things are easy to ignore, mere irritations that barely leave a mark. But in my neighborhood, something far more frustrating was happening, and it didn't take long before it became impossible to dismiss. It began with something small. A package I had ordered online, nothing important, just a book I had been looking forward to reading. The tracking information told me it had been delivered, but when I checked my porch that evening, there was nothing there. I shrugged it off, assuming perhaps the delivery service had left it at the wrong address. Mistakes happened all the time, and I wasn't about to lose sleep over one missing book. But then it happened again. A set of kitchen utensils I had ordered vanished without a trace. Then a pair of sneakers, followed by some household cleaning supplies. Each time the tracking showed the items were delivered right to my door. Each time the porch was empty by the time I stepped outside. Weeks passed, and the frustration grew. At first I thought it might be a delivery driver issue, so I began leaving notes for them, asking them to place packages in a discreet spot. But the problem didn't stop. Then I considered porch pirates, strangers who prowled neighborhoods, looking for unattended deliveries. But there was something strange about it all. The timing, the frequency, the fact that it was happening almost exclusively to me. Then one afternoon, as I pulled into my driveway earlier than usual, I saw something that froze me in place. Across the street, just a few houses down, my neighbor was hurrying up her walkway with a brown cardboard box tucked under her arm. It wasn't oversized or unusually marked, but something about the way she clutched it, the way she glanced around before disappearing inside, gnawed at me. It looked just like one of my missing packages. This neighbor wasn't just any neighbor. She had a reputation, always peering through her blinds, always quick to gossip, always first to file complaints with the HOA if someone's grass grew too high or a trash can lingered at the curb too long. She was the type of person who thrived on control, the type who seemed to think the whole street was her business. And now, I was beginning to believe she had taken things a step further. I wanted to be absolutely sure before I jumped to conclusions. After all, accusing someone of theft wasn't a small matter, especially not in a community where words spread fast and reputations could be ruined overnight. But my instincts told me I was right, and each new missing package only fueled my suspicion. Began watching more closely. From my windows, from the corner of my yard, even from my car parked at odd hours, I observed her. And though I never caught her red-handed again, the pattern was undeniable. Packages disappeared almost as soon as they were delivered. It was as if someone was waiting, watching, ready to swoop in the moment the delivery driver pulled away. The more it happened, the angrier I became. It wasn't just the inconvenience of losing items I had paid for. It was the violation, the knowledge that someone was deliberately taking from me, boldly, without remorse, right under my nose. It was the audacity of it, the smugness I imagined on her face as she opened boxes that weren't hers. And it was then that an idea began to form. If she really was the one behind it, I needed proof. Not just suspicion, not just a hunch, but undeniable evidence. Something so clear, so irrefutable, that even she couldn't deny it. And once I had that, I needed to make sure the lesson stuck. Because taking from me was one thing, but thinking she could get away with it again and again was something I refused to tolerate. So I waited. I planned. I started to think about ways to catch her in the act. Cameras, decoys, timing deliveries, for when I was home. Every option ran through my mind as I weighed the possibilities. But one thing was certain. The days of sitting by quietly while my packages vanished were over. And soon enough, I would make sure my neighbor regretted ever stepping onto my porch. The decision to fight back had been made, but the path forward wasn't immediately clear. Accusing a neighbor of stealing without evidence was dangerous, especially when that neighbor was someone as notorious as the woman across the street. She had lived there for years, long before I had moved in, and she had already cultivated a reputation as someone quick to point fingers but untouchable when it came to accountability. If I confronted her without proof, she would deny everything, twist the story, and make me look like the problem. So I needed evidence. Real evidence. And to get it, I had to start watching. At first, I tried the obvious solution, a security camera. I bought a small device online, one of those doorbell-style cameras that promised to capture motion and alert me to activity. I set it up and felt a sense of relief, confident that the next package thief wouldn't go unnoticed. But the problem was, my neighbor wasn't careless. She was deliberate. Packages seemed to vanish only when I was away, only when the timing worked in her favor. The first few deliveries after I installed the camera went untouched. The boxes sat neatly on my porch until I arrived home and carried them inside. For a moment, I even wondered if I had been wrong all along. But then, as the days stretched into weeks, the thefts began again, this time with an eerie precision. Every time the camera was on and pointed at the porch, nothing happened. But on the one day I forgot to arm the system, a small package disappeared. Another day, the camera was active, but the angle had shifted slightly due to wind and the porch was partially obscured. That day, too, a box vanished. It was as if she somehow knew. That realization unsettled me more than anything. I began to wonder if she had been watching me more closely than I realized, paying attention to when I left the house, when I adjusted the camera, even when I pulled into the driveway. She wasn't just opportunistic. She was calculating. So I escalated. I started keeping odd hours, parking my car down the street and walking back to the house in silence, just to see if I could catch her. I sat by the window on evenings when I expected deliveries, lights off, waiting for the sound of a box hitting the porch. I even adjusted my work schedule, coming home early or leaving late, in hopes of spotting her in the act. And then, finally, my patience was rewarded. One quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the houses, a delivery truck rolled down the street. I watched from my window as the driver placed a small box on my porch before climbing back into the vehicle and heading off. My heart raced as I kept my eyes fixed on the package, refusing to blink. Minutes ticked by. Then, movement. From across the street, I saw her blinds shift ever so slightly. A faint silhouette lingered there, motionless, watching. Then the blinds snapped shut. Within minutes, her front door creaked open and she stepped out, glancing up and down the street. She walked casually at first, as if out for a stroll, but her eyes were locked on my porch. She moved quickly once she thought no one was looking. Straight across the street, up my walkway, and within seconds, the package was gone. Tucked under her arm, hidden as best she could, she turned and hurried back to her house. I had finally seen it with my own eyes, but seeing it and proving it were two very different things. I hadn't managed to capture her on camera. The angle had been wrong, and the recording was useless. The only evidence I had was what I had personally witnessed. It was enough to satisfy me, but not enough to confront her publicly or take to the HOA. That was when the idea of the trap first came to me. If she was bold enough to keep stealing, I would make sure the next package she took wasn't worth stealing. At all. In fact, I would make sure it was something so disgusting, so humiliating that she wouldn't dare try it again. I didn't just want proof anymore. I wanted revenge. Over the next few days, I began planning every detail. I thought about what I could put inside a box that would be harmless but revolting, something that wouldn't get me into legal trouble but would still send a message she couldn't ignore. I imagined her smug face lighting up as she opened the box, only for that smile to twist into horror when she realized what she had actually stolen. The thought alone brought me a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in weeks. But I couldn't rush it. Timing was everything. If the trap was going to work, it had to be irresistible. The box had to look genuine, heavy enough to feel valuable, sealed well enough to pass for a legitimate delivery. And it had to be placed at just the right moment, when I knew she was watching. So I bided my time. I kept ordering normal packages, letting her get comfortable, letting her think she was still getting away with it. Each theft stung, but each one brought me closer to the day I would turn the tables. Because soon, her little game was going to backfire. And when it did, everyone would know. The decision had been made. Watching her stroll across my porch with stolen boxes had pushed me past the point of patience. It wasn't enough anymore to simply know the truth. I needed her to feel it. The plan had to be perfect. This wasn't about getting even with a petty thief. This was about teaching a lesson to someone who thought the whole neighborhood was hers to control. The first step was the package itself. If the trap was going to work, it needed to look authentic. I found an old cardboard box from a previous delivery, one with the kind of branding she would immediately recognize as something valuable. I taped it carefully, making sure the seams looked factory sealed. The weight needed to feel convincing, so I filled the bottom with crumpled paper, layering it until the box had just enough heft to suggest something real inside. But the true contents? That was the part that made me smile. I thought long and hard about what would be revolting but harmless. Something that wouldn't get me into legal trouble but would stick with her. After some consideration, I settled on a mixture that was as foul as I could imagine. Spoiled leftovers scraped from the back of my fridge, food waste that had been sitting in a sealed container long enough to rot, and a generous helping of my dog's contribution to the plan. I sealed it all tightly in a plastic bag, poked just enough holes for the smell to seep through, and tucked it neatly into the box. The result was a package that looked desirable but carried a surprise no one would want. With the bait ready, the next challenge was timing. I knew she watched constantly from behind her blinds. I knew she pounced the moment a delivery truck left. So I chose a day when I was home, a day when the neighborhood was quiet, and I staged the drop-off myself. In the early afternoon, when the street was calm and most neighbors were at work, I placed the box on my porch. I positioned it just the way the delivery drivers always did, front and center, visible from the street. Then I retreated inside, pulling the blinds just enough to give myself a clear view. My heart raced as I sat in silence waiting. Minutes passed. At first, nothing happened. I kept my eyes fixed on her house across the street. Sure enough, the blinds shifted. Just a slight movement, but enough to tell me she was watching. My pulse quickened. She had seen it. Then, as if rehearsed, her front door opened. She stepped out cautiously, her head swiveling left and right as though checking for witnesses. To anyone else, it might have looked like an innocent walk to the mailbox, but I knew better. Her eyes were locked on the package. She crossed the street quickly, her pace picking up the closer she got to my porch. In seconds, she was there. She bent down, scooped up the box, and tucked it under her arm as though it had always been hers. Then, just as quickly, she turned and marched back to her house, disappearing inside with her prize. My trap had been sprung. I sat back, adrenaline coursing through me. She had taken it exactly as I hoped she would. No hesitation, no suspicion. Now all that was left was to wait for her discovery. I pictured her inside, placing the box on her kitchen counter, excited to see what treasure she had stolen this time. I imagined the smug smile spreading across her face as she sliced through the tape, peeling open the flaps, expecting something new and valuable. And then, the moment of truth. Though I couldn't see her reaction directly, I didn't need to. Within minutes, her blinds snapped shut with a violent thud. A faint sound echoed across the street, a shriek, muffled but unmistakable. Then silence. For the first time in weeks, her windows stayed dark, her porch quiet, her blinds firmly closed. I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. The thought of her standing there, staring in horror at the revolting mess inside that box, was more satisfying than I could have imagined. She had walked straight into it, greedy and careless, and now she had to deal with the consequences. But satisfaction wasn't the only thing I felt. There was also a strange sense of power, a realization that I had turned the tables. For weeks, she had been in control, taking from me with boldness and confidence. Now, the script had flipped. She was the one who had been fooled, the one left, holding a box of filth, the one caught in her own greed. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. A woman like her wouldn't simply accept humiliation and move on. She was too proud, too stubborn, too invested in maintaining the illusion that she was in charge. If anything, the trap would only escalate things. She might retreat for now, but sooner or later she would make her move. And when she did, I had to be ready. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the day's events, I couldn't shake the thought of what came next. The battle lines had been drawn. She knew that I knew, even if no words had been exchanged. The silence. Between us wasn't peace, it was tension, thick and heavy, like the pause before a storm. And I had a feeling the storm was coming soon. The morning after the trap, the neighborhood felt eerily quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't see the blinds across the street twitching. No shadowy figure lingered behind the window glass. No curious eyes followed me as I stepped outside to collect the mail or pull the trash bins to the curb. On the surface, it seemed as if the trap had ended everything. She had been caught, humiliated, and silenced. But I knew better. She wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. She wasn't going to shrug off the embarrassment of opening that box and discovering the revolting surprise inside. A woman who had spent years controlling, gossiping, and manipulating wasn't about to let her power slip away so easily. I could almost feel the anger radiating from her house, simmering just below the surface. It started small, subtle enough that most neighbors wouldn't notice. My trash bin, neatly placed by the curb, was tipped over one morning, its contents scattered across the street. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe an animal, but the way the lid had been deliberately removed told a different story. A few days later, I woke to find a smear of something sticky across my car windshield. It wasn't much, just a nuisance, but it was a message. She was pushing back. Each act grew bolder. A note slipped under my doormat with no words, just a crude drawing. A patch of lawn on my side mysteriously doused with something that left the grass yellow and dead. Even my mailbox wasn't spared. Letters shoved in at odd angles, some bent or torn as though handled with unnecessary force. None of it was catastrophic, but together it painted a clear picture. She knew I had set her up, and now she was retaliating. In the only ways she could. The neighborhood gossip machine began to churn soon after. Whispers floated through the block, rumors that painted me as the troublemaker. I overheard one neighbor mention that she had been telling people I was unstable, that I was paranoid, even dangerous. According to her, I had been leaving strange packages around intentionally to frame her, harassing her without cause. Her ability to twist the story was infuriating, but it wasn't surprising. This was what she did best, turning herself into the victim, painting others as villains, and using half-truths to bend opinions in her favor. And for a moment, I worried. It might work. But what she didn't realize was that my trap had done more than just humiliate her. It had also sparked curiosity among the neighbors. People started paying closer attention, watching her more carefully, noticing her patterns. Some had already suspected her of being behind the package thefts. And now, with the recent drama, their suspicions deepened. Still, the retaliation didn't stop. One evening, I returned home to find muddy footprints across my porch, leading up to my front door and then disappearing back toward the street. Another morning, a delivery driver hesitated before handing me a package, mentioning that someone had tried to wave them down earlier, insisting the package belonged across the street. Her tactics were desperate, but they were also dangerous. That was when I realized this was no longer just about packages. This was about control. She had spent years establishing herself as the unspoken authority of the block, and now, by exposing her, I had stripped that authority away. She wasn't just angry about the box. She was furious about the loss of power. I knew I had two choices: ignore her and hope the storm blew over, or fight back harder than before. And ignoring her was no longer an option. So I began documenting everything. Every tipped trash bin, every smear on my car, every rumor I overheard. I took pictures, saved notes, and kept a record of delivery driver accounts. If she wanted to escalate, I would be ready to prove just how far she was willing to go. The tension in the neighborhood grew thicker by the day. Some neighbors avoided eye contact when passing by, unwilling to take sides. Others quietly expressed their support, hinting that they too had lost packages in the past or had been on the receiving end of her petty games. Slowly, the narrative began to shift. She wasn't just my problem, she was a problem for the whole block. Then came the moment that confirmed my suspicions. Late one night, I was woken by the faint sound of movement outside. I crept to the window and pulled back the blinds just enough to see. There she was, standing at the edge of my yard, something clutched in her hand. She crouched low, fiddled with something near my front steps, then darted back across the street like a thief in the night. The next morning, I found what she had left behind: a crude attempt at intimidation, a piece of paper with angry scribbles and threats scrawled across it. It wasn't clever, and it wasn't subtle, but it was proof. Proof that she was escalating beyond petty mischief, that her anger had boiled over into something more. And I knew then that the battle had only just begun, because if she thought the trap had been humiliating, she hadn't seen anything yet. The threats scrawled on paper were the last straw. It wasn't just petty mischief anymore. It was intimidation, an escalation meant to scare me into silence. But fear was the last thing I felt. If anything, it solidified my resolve. She had crossed the line, and now I was going to end this feud for good. I had spent weeks watching her, documenting her every move, every petty act of sabotage, every whisper of rumor. My evidence folder was thick. Photos of vandalism, timestamps, of when she lurked on my porch, accounts from delivery drivers who had been stopped and harassed. I had enough proof to expose her, not just to the neighbors, but to the authorities. But I didn't want to simply stop her. I wanted to ensure she never had the chance to pull something like this again. And for that, I needed one final move. Something public, undeniable, and humiliating enough to shatter the illusion of control she clung to. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Another delivery was scheduled, a large package, something she wouldn't be able to resist. This time, I didn't just set a decoy. I set a trap designed to capture everything, not with disgusting surprises, but with undeniable evidence. Inside the box was a small tracker, discreet and unnoticeable. Around the porch, I set up hidden cameras, their lenses perfectly angled to capture every detail. When the delivery driver left the package at my door, I sat back inside, waiting. The hours ticked by, each one filled with tense anticipation. Finally, just as dusk settled, I saw her curtains twitch. A shadow moved across her window. Moments later, the front door of her house opened, and out she came. Her steps were quick, furtive. She glanced up and down the street, then made her way straight to my porch. The cameras captured everything: the way she crouched, the way her hands gripped the box, the way she struggled slightly under its weight before scurrying back across, the street with it clutched in her arms. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I waited. The tracker inside the box pinged her location, exactly where I expected, inside her house. The cameras had her face, her actions, everything. It was undeniable proof. The next morning, I gathered the evidence into a neat package of my own. Video clips, photos, screenshots of tracker pings. And then I made two moves at once. First, I sent an anonymous tip, with all the evidence attached, to the HOA board, the very organization she loved to manipulate. Second, I sent the same file to a few select neighbors who had quietly expressed their frustrations about her antics. The reaction was explosive. The HOA, notorious for its strict rules and zero-tolerance stance on property misconduct, had no choice but to act. At the next meeting, her behavior was the central topic of discussion. No amount of denial or twisting of the story could save her now. The evidence was too clear, too public. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now spoke up, emboldened by the proof, sharing their own experiences of stolen mail and harassment. The woman who had once ruled the neighborhood with whispers and intimidation was suddenly the outcast. The HOA slapped her with fines, demanded restitution, and made it clear that any further infractions would result in legal escalation. Delivery companies were notified, and drivers were instructed not to hand her packages under any circumstances. But the true sting wasn't in the fines or the HOA's wrath. It was in the way the neighborhood turned against her. The same people who once avoided her gaze now looked at her with disdain. The woman who had thrived on control, who had relished being the center of gossip, now found herself isolated, shunned, and powerless. And I didn't stop there. To seal the humiliation, I uploaded a compilation of the evidence, blurred just enough to protect identities but clear enough to tell the story, to a community page online. The headline read, "Package Thief Caught in the Act, Right in Our Neighborhood." Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Neighbors commented, shared, and laughed, recognizing the figure on camera without needing a name. She had wanted to control the narrative, to paint herself as the victim. But now, the truth was out in the open, undeniable and permanent. For the first time in months, my porch felt safe again. Deliveries arrived and stayed put, untouched. Neighbors greeted me with knowing smiles, some even thanking me for standing up to her. The tension that had once blanketed the street seemed to lift, replaced with a sense of relief. As for her, she stayed hidden behind her blinds, her once proud presence reduced to nothing more than a shadow in a window. The woman who had stolen packages, spread lies, and retaliated with petty vengeance had finally been caught in her own web. In the end, it wasn't just about teaching her a lesson. It was about restoring peace to a neighborhood she had poisoned for far too long. And the best part? I didn't have to lay a finger on her. She had destroyed herself with her own actions. I had simply shone a light on them. The trap had worked better than I could have ever imagined. And from that day on, not a single package ever went missing again.